go. Going live. Awesome. All right. Wow. Well, what a day. What a day, everybody. Got a good subject. We're going to be covering some fascinating aspects of modern therapy using psychedelics and microtubules, which I'll explain what that all is and how it affects the vagus nerve. It's very important. There is an effect between the psychedelics people are taking, natural and man-made, and your vagus nerve, and we'll dive into what is going on. So you're going to learn a lot, whether you're a patient or you're a practitioner or whatever, just genuinely interested, this will be up your alley. But before, yeah, I knew it, Chris. I knew it. So before we do that, we are going to do, as promised, our simultaneous squeeze. So if you've watched videos before, you'll know what we'll do. If you don't know how to do it, stick around to the end of the video, and I'll explain how you do the method. But everybody who knows, let's go. In 3, 2, 1, deep breath in. Little sip at the top. And then hold and squeeze breath retention for 5 seconds. And exhale. Very good. Nice. So in the chat, what'd you think? Did you get an effect from that? So that's awesome. So let's jump into it. So on the agenda today is really a topic that was actually special requested by someone who kind of knew the right questions to ask me to go, okay, this is definitely somebody who knows what they're asking. The question was, generally speaking, about the relationship between microtubules in the brain and memory, as I had just spoken about Alzheimer's and dementia just a few videos ago. So if you want to go see where I talked about that, you can look through. Usually the YouTube channel is a great place to see archived videos in the podcast and live video section. So you can go back and see all the videos I've done with the titles on it. The one that's called Alzheimer's and dementia. So typically, when you develop Alzheimer's, those microtubules in your brain start to depolymerize and fall apart. And when a microtubule falls apart, you lose your memory. So there's clearly a connection between the two. Now, her specific question was about natural psychedelics like psilocybin, which are also related to man-made ones like LSD or whatever, or any type of psychoactive compound. They all have a similar connection to how they modulate and modify consciousness, as well as your potential to remember or to create new memories. So there is an effect between the two, and I'll explain more in a moment. But generally speaking, just kind of overview of the area, the landscape we want to cover is how those psychedelics used in therapy can change your somatic memory, your processing memory, because psychedelics are used a lot in traumatic therapies, PTSD treatment, and they can be helpful. And I want to kind of hypothesize why that might be happening. And so, yeah, in terms of the rest of the question, just kind of generalized around, why are these psychedelics powerful tools in helping people overcome these, traumatic experiences? And are those memories stored in the body? Are they stored in the brain? So we're going to be covering some very interesting stuff, But yeah, she's curious if I have a take on this concept, and yes, I do. For more information, what I will say is those who want to go deeper and deeper and deeper into this, I highly recommend you look into the work of Dr. Stuart Hamroff, who is an anesthesiologist from the Arizona State University in Tucson Medical Department, and he's written about microtubules, consciousness, in some cases, how psychedelics affect microtubules for decades longer than I've been around on the internet. So has published books back in the 80s on this stuff, I think, or whatever, but theories on this. So he's a very interesting subject. Now, I've had long discussions with him about this, and it's very fascinating. So let's first look at the microtubule as that first thing. So in between, I told you on the Alzheimer's video that the microtubule concept will come up again and again. So microtubules are very complex folded protein units that circle around each other like a helix and they're like building blocks. They've got 13 circulating, repeating tubulin. They stack onto each other like IKEA building blocks. They're just really well-crafted things. Now, inside of them, they have these things called a benzene ring or a resonance channel. And this resonance channel is made out of a benzene ring, which is carbon. So it's a hexagon of carbon. And inside of that carbon are free-flowing carbon atoms that basically twist, and they do this kind of a movement like windshield wipers. There's 3 of them, one from the top, one from the side, and one from the other side. So there's 3 free-flowing carbon atoms wiggling against each other. So when this one goes this way, this one is not attracted to it, so it flips this way, and this one goes up, but then they flip backwards. So if you look at this hexagon, you have 3 windshield wipers flipping back and forth, all trying to avoid each other, and the frequency at which they do it depends on the environment that this benzene ring is in. So that flipping happens at a certain very fast frequency. So we think of it like that. Like, so it either makes a tone, and the way you detect it is you shine a laser into it, and the laser will basically get absorbed at a certain frequency of how fast those benzene rings are fluctuating or pulsing. So when you take a psychedelic chemical, which also has its own benzene ring, and because of quantum dipole forces, when you force a benzene ring, I need to make just a hand circle, not these okay signals. Just I'm not gonna get canceled or something like that. It's scary. Oh my God, internet is madness. You guys deserve to be just to go. Anyway, so you have this I need to get I should have prepared more. Get little benzene ring like chemistry set things. Anyway, so you have a benzene ring here in your microtubule, and you have a benzene ring in a psychedelic, and the closer they get to each other, the more they influence that flickering, pulsing windshield wiper effect. And that can induce a change in consciousness. Consciousness as we understand it, well, as a subset of people who try to understand consciousness, understand it. Understand consciousness to be an effect that rises from this billions of these benzene rings all stacked right next to each other. So your consciousness is the collection of oh my God, that's so what the hell was that? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. My computer just made some weird sound. Oh my God, what the hell was that? Okay, sorry, I got like a text or something like that. My bad. Hopefully it didn't scare you guys. Anyway, so you have this benzene ring in the brain, in the microtubule, that's wiggling really quickly, and at normal levels of consciousness, they're all wiggling together. But when you put a benzene ring from psychedelics like psilocybin close to it, you basically mass influence the pulsation rate of those microtubules. Thus, you can induce things like altered states of consciousness or hallucinations, or even in some cases like a loss of consciousness. But if you've ever hallucinated, or about, again, it's like one thing to read about hallucinating, and it's a different thing entirely to have hallucinated. So there is a certain amount of psilocybin, or maybe something like dimethyltryptamine, something like that, where it's you smoke enough of it and your consciousness is projected into a hyper reality space that's not in this, doesn't seem to be in the physical environment anymore. So that's pretty bizarre. And that could happen because maybe your consciousness is designed when you're sober to be able to resonate with the environment of the material world. But when you do a psychedelic, you frequency flip your microtubules to a higher detection rate. And maybe when people say that they're hallucinating and seeing different planes of existence or entities or incredible fractal geometric shapes floating around their head or whatever it is, is that they've tuned their microtubules to a much rapid detection rate, and they can identify and experience things that are always in some way present in our reality, but our brains are just really good at filtering out some of those frequencies of different dimensions or higher dimensions or lower frequencies or whatever. So this is a concept we know very well in electrical engineering. And it's essentially the concept that if I have a tool that can measure the flickering of a light. So, like fluorescent tubes, or how about this, for instance? Have you, back in the 90s when camcorders became more common, did you ever at home take your VHS, those big Sony cameras or those Panasonics, and point it at like an old CRT monitor? You ever seen that before? And the CRT monitor on the screen, the glass screen, would start flickering when you recorded it onto a VHS tape. And the reason that was happening was because the camera, the recording device, was scanning the screen faster than what your eyes were scanning it at. And so it was able to detect that the refresh rate of your CRT monitor isn't persistent, that the CRT monitor is actually scanning lines like really quickly, that the CRT monitor is scanning and presenting the image to your eyes fast enough for your eyes, your human eyes, to think there's a persistent visual image of, someone on TV. They look normal. But when you point a camera at it, the camera has a shutter in it that's detecting light much faster than the human eye can detect it. Therefore, the camera is able to see a level of reality that's more fine-tuned than what the human eye can see. So in a way, psychedelics act almost in a hypothetical way, as a tuning mechanism to increase the rate at which your brain is capturing reality a little bit, which is why some people might claim that when you're hallucinating, you're not just always making something up, that you're actually seeing things that are there, but you're just in normal sober consciousness. You're not designed to be able to see that much detail in any one given time. Does that make sense so far, people watching? If that sort of makes sense, say yes or make sense in the chat. Or if I've lost you completely, please let me know. Any metaphors like a television and a VHS camera are relevant to people who used it. Maybe you're like, I'm too young. I never used a VHS camera. I don't know what the hell a VHS is. I'm fortunate, born in the 80s, that I did see that effect when I was a kid. Good. So Shar, thank you. So yes. So at least one person's with me here. So that's sort of the hypothesized effect that psychedelics have on a unit of consciousness that I do believe that the microtubule in the brain is a subunit of consciousness with a microtubule that's active and normal in function, but multiplied by many billions of them working in tandem, like a big symphony, generates your consciousness. And when you start to put psilocybin into that mix, it's like a conductor going boo, boo. It's changing the resonance of those microtubules. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, that's how I believe it to be in a visual context, right? When we all know windshield wipers, they flicker like this. You can make your windshield wipers go faster or slower, and they have different, purposes. When you're calm and you're resting and relaxing, your windshield wipers might slow down in your brain, and you might get to a very slow level of consciousness. But when you're awake, you're playing a sport, you're in a high focus area, your windshield wipers and your microtubule benzene rings are flickering back and forth really, really fast. So you're able to almost slow down time too. And that's an effect that people have reported in, like, I believe Michael Jordan, the famous basketball player, reported that as soon as he steps foot onto the court in a professional NBA game, that it seems as if time is slowing down. The progression of time for him is slowing down, most likely because I would hypothesize that his microtubules are resonating at a much faster rate, and they can almost see the scan lines going down the screen, but in reality. And he can see players like moving like that, right? I'm not saying it's that pronounced, but there's a time dilation effect that does happen in certain scenarios. So cool. Well, we've established in a former video that microtubules, when they die, that you develop Alzheimer's and you lose your memory. In this video, we've established that when you take psychedelics, you also affect microtubules and things can happen. You can, have effects of psilocybin, and those two things are acting upon the same thing. So microtubules don't just exist in your brain, they also exist in your body. And one of the other areas outside of the brain where you have massive clusters of microtubules all really joined together, all very close enough where they could have, some very interesting crossover effects, is going to be in the vagus nerve in your neck and throughout your body. And I have absolutely tended to notice that folks who have PTSD or physical trauma that seems to be stored in their body, right? When people kind of like do this, they kind of hold in tension in their body. That seems to be kind of a memory of a past event, that when they make peace with the past event and they calm down, they relax from it, is it almost seems as if the traumatic energy has been released. So in the context of using psychedelics to do somatic therapy work, I believe that psychedelics give your body the ability to observe itself from a higher level. So we all know the term of like somebody who's not very self-aware, right? You've seen people who you look at them, you listen to them talk, and you can clearly say, this person is not very self-aware. It's like they're making mistakes that they almost don't understand that they're making. Or they're saying things that are so rude in like a family dinner. Like if they could only listen to what they're saying out of their own mouth, they would realize how just absolutely absurd they sound. But you can have people who are not self-aware. So that is a condition of lower consciousness, so to speak. Like their microtubules aren't all kind of resonating in the way that they need to be resonating for them to have self-referential consciousness. Whereas, some people who have like very high self-awareness can almost have so much self-awareness that they develop an anxiety because of it. And I've actually had quite a few friends in my life who have been hyper intelligent. These kids like in high school, college, would rewrite mathematical proofs as like bonus for their teacher. I'm like, why did you do that? Like, you didn't have to do that. Like, oh, I just saw I could do it, so I did. And these people like now work in like, high level statistical banking and chemistry and stuff like that. So I had some pretty smart friends growing up. But one of them in particular was so super hyper aware of his own words, language, behavior, that it was like he was monitoring himself in real time. And that might be what people consider the ego in some way, right? Kind of. I mean, the ego infers that there's something that can be, you can release your ego, or you can be less egotistical, or you can have a highly egoic person that identifies with their ego. So in our popular culture, we already do speak widely about this concept that within one person's body or brain or mind, that there can almost be multiple types of different versions of themselves, right? Fair enough? I mean, we can all agree on that. I'm not this isn't crazy to talk about. So in that self-referential state, when you combine psilocybin and you are potentially giving psychedelics, which will retune microtubules to a higher level of awareness, you can give somebody who may not be hyper self-aware normally a little bit more self-awareness of themselves in the moment. So that could be how psychedelics are able to influence the vagus nerve and the microtubules. I haven't really established the microtubule vagus connection or psychedelic connection yet, but just looking at the psychedelic aspect on the brain is by increasing selectively certain lobes of your brain to increase its awareness of what's going on at a lower level. You do typically see that people who are having a psychedelic experience have a deeper awareness of what they're doing, similar to one of my good friends growing up in Oregon, which is he was and is highly intelligent, super aware of everything that he says, in that case to the degree that he developed an anxiety around everything that can create a neuroticism, an OCD in part. Like, it's like you can never be too good, and what happens is that that's an innate skill set that all humans can develop, and then you have to learn another skill set of being okay with how reality is unfolding, which means that the way that you speak, the language that you use, the habits and behaviors and mannerisms that you have, when you become self-aware of your own behavior, can become a mirror to something that might be uncomfortable for you. Namely, in his case, his mother was very domineering over his everything. And he had this like neurotic tic that was, it's like he gave his mother that space in his brain to create that neuroticism in a way. In his case, he survived it. He did good with it. In some other cases, not so much, right? So it's that self-referential awareness that you give someone when you give them something like psychedelics. Now, if you go to another thing, just to kind of connect the dots here, if you look at things like the Old Testament and you look at the book of Genesis, it talks about in the beginning, Adam and Eve existed in the Garden of Eden, and they didn't know sin. They didn't know bad stuff. They were just kind of free in the garden. And then the snake came down with the apple and gave Eve the apple, and she gained knowledge. You know, it was the tree of knowledge, right? So some people have suggested potentially that that's an allegory of what psychedelics gave the first humans, which is that it took them from these kinds of animal type consciousness entities that they're just kind of instinctually hobbling along from place to place, eating, reproducing, finding shelter, whatever. Then they consumed something that gave them extraordinary mental powers, and that was the moment where Adam looked down and realized that he was naked, and then he covered himself up with the fig tree. That's why they're wearing the leaves. It was literally, oh my God, I'm now aware of my own body. I'm naked. I should cover myself up. I should be decent, or whatever they were thinking. And it's just, it's obviously just an allegory of some sort. So there could be some connection with this consumption of a certain particular type of fruit. In mushroom growing, they do call the mushroom the fruiting body. It does give you self-referential things. I could see how a godlike entity would be disappointed in you for eating magic mushrooms out of poop or out of the ground where they grow in nature. So there could be something to it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of one thing that I think is important to say here is that Psychedelics can be helpful in therapy. However, there are a litany of cases of people using psychedelics and having extremely bad experiences, extremely terrible trips, either going insane permanently, losing their minds permanently, just destroying their lives based on psychedelics. So to say and to try to attempt to make any tenuous connection that like psychedelics have this innate therapeutic quality to them is, I think, dead wrong and should never be done. Let me just say that like as clear cut as possible. And to make that case even further, a great story that I've read about was the the head, and this might get me in trouble or on some list, but you know, whatever. It's for your enjoyment, so I hope you appreciate this. In the 1950s and the 60s, the United States Central Intelligence Agency ran a program called MK Ultra to study the effects of psychedelics to alter someone's mind, to control their mind, or whatever they wanted. The head of that program, one of the guys running the CIA at the time, who was considered, looking back, you know, hindsight, as one of the most vicious, brutal managers at the CIA at the time. I mean, running like, you know, death squads in South America and just doing really horrific things to other human beings. At the time, was almost on a daily basis taking intravenous injections of LSD. He was high on acid almost all the time. You know, on like microdosing it basically. Not like full-blown like trips, but he was on LSD constantly. And the machinations that were created out of this guy's mind were like, great, how do we like arm the Sandinistas in South America? I mean, different decades and stuff, but similar type of, you know, Banana Republic shenanigans with the CIA, ordering death hits, death squads, all kinds of crazy stuff. So I always remember that story when people in any way suggest like, man, if everybody could just do magic mushrooms, we'd all be happy and peaceful, or anything like that. No, that is the most irresponsible line of thought that you could ever have. There's no guarantee that putting psychedelics into someone's body is going to cure them of anything at all, and you are playing with fire for sure. You are risking a lot in that case. So I'm not doing this video to make a recommendation for any of this stuff. So let me just be clear. I can talk about this from a perspective that I have, but yeah, as far as like psychedelic assisted therapies, honestly, man, I think there's way better options that don't involve that stuff. Just saying. It's such a hard situation. I know there's going to be people who disagree and people who agree. There's lots of thoughts on it, but I don't tend to agree with these kinds of psychedelic therapies at all. So other than that, but yeah, I think as far as there is a connection between these things elevate your conscious awareness to certain things. But I think lastly, just to kind of make the final point here, is that your eyes, your brain, and your ears and your senses of taste and touch and smell and light and everything that you perceive is a narrow interpretation of all of the things that are happening in your reality. Like, I don't particularly know like all the bird sounds coming out of my window until I intentionally focus on it. There's a bird chirping outside of my window. There's probably 10 times the amount of noise if I would sit down and be quiet and listen. So your brain is very good at filtering out stuff that does not need to be put into your body. It is possible if you have any sense on a spiritual level, if you have any experience in the spiritual disciplines of, energies that are not things that you can touch with your fingertips, things that are energies, is that most likely you have an intuitive sense that there are energies that you can't see, taste, or touch that can be around you or influence you, or that there are bigger things happening in the world there are bigger forces that are unseen, that are out there, that are doing things. Some people might call them, there could be some evidence that there are maybe entities or, and I see your question, Rosalie, we'll get to it in a second, that there may be some type of entities that exist and are around us, and that we can, without understanding what we're doing or non-intentionally, create a gap or a portal or an opening into our mind and our body or our spirit that can allow entities into our body to drive us like a mechanical skin suit. And if you look around at the world right now and you go, wow, there are some really sick, deranged, crazy people walking around, and they happen to have TikTok accounts, and they have really crazy looking eyes and really crazy piercings and tattoos, and their eyes are weird looking, and they're saying the craziest things on camera about what they want to do to other people. And you can look at that and go, oh, that's weird, whatever, who am I to judge? But you can also go like, man, if I were a believer of some of these traditional spiritual traditions that talked at length for thousands of years about the dangers of like allowing your body to be a vessel for other energies that absolutely want to drive you like a skin suit, there could be things that would prefer to get into your body, latch in, and operate you like a mech machine and make you make decisions that are like, holy cow, this is not the same human that I saw 10 minutes ago. This person's possessed in some way. I'm not talking about Catholic possession or anything like that. We're not talking about exorcism. But, a lot of people who also know about this also really do decry the risks of taking psychedelics, even microdosing them. So I would just urge extreme caution around any type of psychedelic anything, even if you think, well, I want to release my trauma. I've read stories about young and middle-aged women who had arguably very traumatic childhoods. We can kind of fill in the blanks there. And they said, I've heard so much good about this psychedelic stuff. I'm going to do a whole year and I'm going to clean out all the negative stuff in my body. And I'm just going to dedicate myself to like weekly psychedelic treatment and just really just once and for all, just cleanse my whole energy of all the bad stuff in my body. And nothing good came from that. Their whole life was turned upside down. They started questioning their entire reality. Not in a good way, mind you. There are downsides to taking these drugs. There are other ways to treat depression. There are other ways to get neuroplasticity. There are other ways to do it. And I just personally, I think that there's a whole different ball game when we're talking about treating these things. That throwing psilocybin at is probably not a good idea. Personally, that's what I think. I think honestly using things like vagus nerve stimulation, which is non-invasive, doesn't leave a mark, it doesn't leave any drugs in your system, has no at all apparent opening up of portals into your brain for like crazy stuff. Go on Google and look at like, what does it look like when someone has a massive mental breakdown from using psychedelics like psilocybin or DMT or acid? Have you ever met someone who's microdosed LSD for 2 years straight? It's not pretty, folks. You're not looking at someone with like, oh wow, this like has such an immersive, enlightened energy to them. They have such a good spiritual energy. It's like dark, dude. It is dark stuff. So, again, in the meme world, we would say it's dark-sided, and you need to stay away from that stuff. Personally, I think, honestly, and, many of my clients who are probably on here who use vagus nerve stimulation to stimulate their vagus nerve are like, what depression, what anxiety? I feel way better, and I didn't have to go through any psychedelics, right? It's just because it's popular doesn't mean it's the best thing. So yeah, I would say, Rosalie, from experience, I wouldn't ever, man, in a healthcare setting, honestly, no, I don't want my doctor walking on me having a hallucination experience. That's not fun. You just get one rude nurse who looks at you funny or does something weird in a hospital setting while you're hallucinating or on ketamine or whatever. Very not good. Not good. Says it helps with neuroplasticity. You know what helps with neuroplasticity? Learning new skills, taking lion's mane mushrooms, stimulating your vagus nerve. And treatment-resistant depression. FDA has already approved vagus nerve stimulation for treatment-resistant depression already. So I would say go there. You're not seeing the severe mental breakdown side effects that can happen from psychedelics. So anyway, that's my opinion. I'm sure some people would be very disappointed. Wow, how could you not wholeheartedly recommend psychedelics? Because I grew up in Ashland, Oregon, north of California, and I've seen every type of psychedelic drug used on humans in the whole country, probably. Ashland, Oregon has a ton of that. The Grateful Dead considered Ashland, Oregon their second home next to San Francisco, for Christ's sakes, right? So yeah, it was there. It was all over. I've seen it. I'm not, and I've never had a bad trip. I've never been like, oh my God, I was personally affected. Anytime I've ever experimented with these things, I've had a great freaking time. It was fantastic, but I didn't go into it I want to resolve my deepest traumatic experiences. No, I went to it because I'm I'm going to go see Radiohead tonight in the park, in Golden Gate Park, and with my friends and have fun tonight. Honestly, psychedelics are fun to go get crazy with, but if you know anything about Viking history, there's a movie, I forget what the movie was called. It's kind of a Viking, what's the name? It was out a year or so ago. It's about this guy who's a Viking, and they would take psychedelic mushrooms to go into berserker mode, and they start pounding their chest and working yourself up into a frenzy, and then they would just literally make each other go insane, and then they would rush into the enemy's tribe or whatever, into their village, and then just pillage and plunder, and the rest, all on psychedelics too, mind you. So I don't know, man. For resolving trauma, creating trauma, who knows? I don't know. But you got to know the history of this kind of stuff. You got to know the deeper history. So anyway, for right now, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm certain we'll come back to this at another point, but for my live stream here on YouTube, I'm going to end it there, and we're just going to go private here on Facebook. So thanks everybody so much for watching on YouTube. I hope this is enjoyable, and I hope this makes sense. Hope this answered some questions. Thanks so much. See you, YouTube. All right. So